Hi everyone, and welcome to the Wearfer in Conversation podcast. My name is Olga and I am your host today. So today's conversation is rather a monologue, or perhaps a conversation with you guys. So I hope you've enjoyed the first episode with Chi from Chi QC. To me, it was a wonderful journey to explore his business, and I hope to do more of these in the future. But for today, I thought it would be really fun to reflect personally on 2023 so far and get a little bit more personal with you guys, sort of looking at what interests me, what inspires me, what I have learned so far, what ideas I came across in 2023, and answer some of your questions as well towards the end. So I tend to be quite... So what I noticed is that I'm quite slow to finish stuff, but very quick to start them, which is something I'm working on actively. But very similarly with this podcast, I sort of launched myself into launching a podcast. However, something like a month has passed, and I felt very uninspired to seek out new guests for the podcast, to push and really force almost a conversation with anyone for the second episode. And I thought I would go back to the source and actually have a conversation with myself and you guys. So do a solo episode. And I think that's kind of the first realization that I would like to share with you, is that of perfectionism. I almost felt like I was seeking perfection with my podcast, and that I had to have the best and most interesting guests and bring that to you. But if I don't have that, I can't progress, I can't move on, I can't release another episode. And I felt like many of us could probably relate to this idea that perfectionism is not just about trying to be perfect, but actually a way to ignore challenges, to not step out of your comfort zone, to not do things that you want to do because you're afraid of not doing them perfectly. And I just wanted to get out there and do a solo podcast because it is something that I have never done before. It's not something I don't think I really would enjoy, or am I enjoying? We'll see, maybe I can reflect on that later on. It is a weird experience just chatting to yourself. So definitely something out of my comfort zone. I feel like with most things I like to enjoy the process rather than the final outcome. But with any time that I sort of step up on a stage or share my thoughts with a wider audience through a recording like this one, it's not something I enjoy. I'd rather do it just for the outcome in terms of sharing possibly some learnings and in the hope of you learning and taking away something as well. So that's sort of my first realization, I guess. So like I said already, I'd like to introduce certain categories to keep me on top and keep me consistent and keep me focused throughout this conversation, or rather monologue. And for today, I have a bunch of these. So I'll be sort of kicking off with the books I read, or rather just a couple of highlights from my favorite books so far this year. Some podcasts that I either came across this year or I have been an active fan of for many, many months now. My inspiration point, I feel like I have been quite inspired in 2023, so I'd like to share some of these and maybe get any of you inspired as well. I don't really want to sound like a self-help guru or anything like that, but I'm asked by friends, family, strangers, sort of the big life questions of, how to live your best life, how to achieve what you want in your life, and how to be content with your life. So maybe tap into some of those. And finally, there has been some questions around Wearfer. Thanks a lot for submitting these. and as well as my PhD journey. So I will tap into them as well at the end. So for the sake of time, I will just kick off, and I guess I should kick off by saying who am I and what I'm doing, and introduce myself, let you a little bit into my world. So my name is Olga. Like I said, I am the founder at Wearfer. I founded Wearfer in 2020. I was going to say 2020, but 2020 something, but it is 2020. And it was sort of at the midst of the pandemic where I had some spare time on my hands, and I always had this itch to start something from scratch, to build something and create. And I was already in the industry of fashion and sustainability, and it was almost like a natural step to explore this area and build a business out of it and face some of the challenges that the industry is tackling. And then sort of as I was doing that, I was navigating myself through a lot of change. And I really do believe the universe conspired in a way that I ended up doing and undertaking a PhD at the University of Glasgow. And again, sort of building on top of what I am very much interested in, which is fashion and sustainability, and this time in the second-hand charity sector in the UK. So looking at the problem from a very different angle to what I do at Wearfer and what I did previously, which was more focused on fashion and technology. Okay, so I guess we can then smoothly navigate towards our categories. The first one being books. So I am a massive reader. I love reading. I tend to wake up in the morning and spend at least half an hour reading. I feel like that's when my brain really feels like a sponge and I soak up all the good stuff from the books that I read. But equally, I like to really devote half an hour or so towards the end of the day to read, and that's when I tend to pick up books that are lighter and help me fall asleep and help me ease into sort of a relaxation mode. I have to say I'm not always 100% there, but it's a practice I want to continue. So the two books I highlighted here for myself, the first one being The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. So this book is a personal reflection from Rick Rubin, who is a music producer out in LA. I first came across Rick Rubin when I was, and I still am, but definitely massively obsessed with the Red Hot Chili Peppers as a teenager, and he produced many, if not all, of their albums. And I've learned about his craft and his way of being back then, and it's always kind of stuck with me throughout. And I was so pleased to see that he released a book, almost like a constellation of his thoughts throughout his career, his thoughts on the process of creating and what being a creative really means, what it means to be an artist in life. And the book, while it talks about and deals with the creative industries and sort of how a piece of music comes to be, or how an artist tends to think, how a singer or how a painter devotes themselves into their craft, I really do think that we all can and should be creative in whatever we do in life. So I really see creativity as building something that didn't exist before, and it could be building a unique skill that is unique to you. And one of the quotes that I took away from the book is, look for what you notice but no one else sees. And I think that's really powerful. I think we're all so unique that we can all tap into that uniqueness and see things through our own eyes and interpret them with our own reality and bring creativity into the world, bring new things into the world, and that extremely unique way. So I loved reading that book. I felt extremely inspired just to be more creative on a daily basis, whether it's writing an email, can I be more creative writing an email, or interacting on someone on the street, being at the hairdresser, being curious, sowing seeds, trying things out and see what sticks, what doesn't. Yeah, definitely recommend the book to anyone who feels a little bit uninspired or is just curious to learn about being more creative and what it means to be a creative, and really tap into that way of being. The second book that I was totally shook by, and something that has already changed my life, and I know these words sound like a lot, but it is so true. The book is In the Flow by Alisa Vitti, and the particular book opened my eyes to my menstrual cycle and the menstrual cycle of all the women who are menstruating, who are in the beautiful and unique phase in their life that is menstruation. And I feel like we as women collectively try to demonize this part of life. We think that it slows us down, and we tend to sort of have very negative emotions towards it. We don't cherish it, and we for sure don't take benefit from this unique opportunity that nature gives us. And so without really giving too much away, what I have sort of taken away from this book is that a woman's body and the way a woman works is not just according to the circadian rhythm of 24 hours, where we follow the sun and we have, or we should have been sleeping throughout the night and then waking up full of energy, tackling the day and sort of repeating that cycle day in and day out. What was sort of really eye-opening for me is the fact that we women have quite a mix of hormonal changes happening throughout the month, which means that we feel quite differently, and not only feel differently, but our physiology changes, the way our body behaves changes. So at certain points in our cycle, we will be burning more energy, we will be much more outgoing, and then at some other parts we will want to slow down. And this is sort of a natural way that we should embrace rather than criticize and hate. It really changed the way that I approach the way I eat, the way I exercise, and the way I think about myself as a woman and what I can achieve with what I have, so the tools I've been given, and how really to take those tools and step up my life, really. And not enough time has passed for me to really say that I have seen results just as yet, but as I am tracking where I am in that infradian monthly cycle of 28 days, I start to notice and pick on points where my mood changes, and I understand why it changes, and that understanding really helps me to to make the most of it and not to hate myself, but rather to embrace those changes. And equally, when I was trying to push exercises when my body was just completely drained and was giving up, now I understand why exactly that is. So I think it's a book full of treasures for any woman to read. What is so crucial to me is to actually pass on this knowledge to young girls and children, and I would have loved to know all of this way before I had to suffer from period pains or other symptoms. And I'm sure many women suffer in different ways, and I know that they do. So it's a massive recommend from me. Next on my list is our podcast that I have been really enjoying. So hopefully this will be something that's really interesting for anyone who's interested in entrepreneurship and learning about other entrepreneurs and their journeys. The first one is the podcast by David Senra, and it's called Founders, and it's a podcast I have been listening to quite religiously for the last, I would say, maybe 6 months now. Time flies, but yeah, it's been sort of my one of the top podcasts that I like to listen to for both inspiration around entrepreneurship, but also just broadening my horizons, learning what other people had to get through in order to get to where they did. So launching businesses, relaunching businesses, failing multiple times, going through struggles, that messy middle. And I really recommend this space for anyone who wants to tap into the entrepreneurial life. The host, I love the way that he approaches the podcast, because it's about the founder and not about the business. It tends to focus on their background, where they're from, how did they arrive at the business, and then sort of how did they expand and what struggles they went through. It's typically based on biographies, so you can also take a lot out in terms of book inspirations if you're into that. And yeah, I just feel like it is such a great space to tap into entrepreneurship and business in general. The one that I have recently tuned into more often is the Wellness with Ella by Deliciously Ella. So I am a big fan of the wellness app that Ella has created, and I tend to follow a lot of her recipes, a lot of plant-based recipes, but also a lot of the yoga, barre, pilates, as well as meditations and guided sort of relaxations as well. And never so much listened to the podcast until very recently, and I found it quite refreshing. The one that I have listened to just the other day is with Jake Humphrey, and I thought that was a brilliant male perspective on wellness and mental health. And again, very much like the founders, the story of Jake was shared, and I loved always to hear the backstories of successful people who did interesting things with their life. And from that, I also learned about the High Performance podcast that Jake hosts. And again, not something that I've been practicing and listening to for a long time, but I feel like it is becoming one of my top podcasts that I am tuning into at the moment as well. So this is pretty much it. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to move on towards sources of inspiration. I don't know how else to categorize these elements. It's somewhere in February, I felt ill, and it was quite an experience, I would say. I was sort of bedbound for about a week and a half, not feeling too well, and almost forced to take a step back and be a bit bored with myself and with my life. I wasn't in a place where I felt good enough to even take this time to read many books or listen to a lot of things. I was just really tired, and I took a lot of the time just to sleep, to sort of gaze and think and have conversations with myself. It was really interesting because I live alone at the moment, and I'm quite used to having conversations with myself, whether it's me speaking out loud to myself or just in my head. I sometimes catch myself having dinner and finding out that I just had a full-on conversation with myself about something that is going on in my life or something I want to think about or talk about, and it's quite interesting. I definitely also recommend doing that. But this part, this period of 1.5 weeks, let's say, when I was ill, has been quite interesting. I arrived at a space where I wanted to feel, again, more creative. I actually was reading a little bit the book by Rick Rubin then, whenever I felt like it. And so I dug out my old sort of paints and paint brushes and other tools that I used when I was, I don't know, sort of early 20s, but even earlier than that. And I found this newfound love for painting as a way to relax, but also feel calm and grounded, and a way to sort of distance myself from the world. I always saw painting as a very creative process, obviously, but as something that gives me this feeling of always being able to patch up and sort of restart. You know, when you're painting, oftentimes you do something wrong or something you don't really like, and you can always cover it with an extra layer of paint and fix it and arrive at something that you actually enjoy. And I tend to take that away into my life as well. So I reconnected with that, and that was really fun. And again, emphasizing that idea of perfectionism, and that I would get so frustrated when I first drew a leaf of a plant, and it didn't look anything like the actual leaf. And then I thought to myself, but does it have to look anything like it? Can it not just be about the process and about tuning in to that piece of paper and that paintbrush and that pencil? And then one thing that I always think about is what's in my head isn't always going to be translated into the physical. And it's something that I actually took away also from the book of Rick Rubin, is that it's so difficult to translate the unearthly, which is sort of your thoughts and your imagination, to the earthly, which is physical. And sometimes we get disappointed because things don't work out the way that we thought they would, that we've imagined them they would. And having that and being at peace with the final outcome of that translation, which is completely lost in the process, is okay. And is very helpful. I found that really helpful. Another sort of part that was reignited in me is journaling. And I mean, we hear about journaling time and time again. We are bombarded by tips on journaling, making your best life possible, things like that, and that journaling will solve all your problems. And while I don't claim it does, I really find taking some time out of my day, doesn't always have to be every single day, but on a regular basis, picking up a pen and a paper and writing or drawing things or sketching or making mind maps of some sort, just connecting with piece of paper through with a pen and piece of paper. I find that really therapeutic and almost like a way to flesh out everything that's in my head and clear it out and put it on paper. It also just, to me, seems very romantic in some way. I feel like every time I sit down and I start to write, it's almost like I'm romanticizing my life. And similarly with the painting, it's very hard to describe the feeling, but it's really interesting, and I like the slowing down and the distancing yourself and almost, romanticizing your life a little bit. You can write about your dreams, for instance, as well, or again, translating what is in your head to a piece of paper, maybe to get some clarity on certain things. And ever since being ill, again, going back to that time, I do feel like I have been romanticizing my life way more than before. Through the incapability of doing anything, I had this new wave of energy and power to actually enjoy the little things in life, to get myself flowers, to look out the window, put my head out and breathe the fresh air, go on a walk, not really thinking about what's coming up next and what's on my to-do list and things like that. Really so helpful to leading a more content life, because one of the key things that I live by is actually quite a stoic sort of philosophy, is only focus on what you can control, and everything else that is out of your control is not worthwhile worrying about or thinking too much about. And what's in your control are your thoughts, the way you interpret the reality we live in, and the way you react to things. And if I react in a calm and romantic sort of way, then that's how I will feel. That's the energy I'm going to give out. So I feel like kind of combining all of this has made me appreciate life way more than I did prior. And yeah, I'm really content. I don't know, I wouldn't say happy, because happy is another interesting an interesting term that we can explore another time. I don't feel like I'm seeking happiness either way. There's so much suffering in my life as well, and then so many lessons and challenges, but being content also with those challenges and lessons is important, and focusing on what I can control. Again, going back to the how I interpret, how I receive these challenges, and what I think about them, how I portray them. Really, really important. These are sort of the concepts that really keep me afloat and keep me going. Okay, I mean, we're getting really, really deep here. But I guess very smoothly, again, we can move into this second to last category for today's podcast, and that is how to live your best life. Again, for the lack of a better way of categorizing these elements, I guess. So I have been always pondering this idea of how did I arrive to where I am now, and what it means to live the best life with the tools that you were given, with the circumstances you find yourself in. And without simplifying it too much, I really do believe that a lot of it comes down to this idea of being all in. So a lot of people tend to think about the options they have, and they get overwhelmed with the options they have in life. And also following from that is this idea of regretting, going one way and not the other, doing something rather than another thing, moving here or living here, being with this person or being with another person. To me, a lot of problems get solved when you think about the concept of being all in. So right now, I find myself being a founder at Wearfer, which is a sustainable clothing brand, and then being a PhD student, a researcher, being a tutor for the university, things like that. So these are sort of my choices, and this is where I find myself in. This is what I'm doing. And I find that being successful at these things means being all in on these things. So not really thinking too much about what if I just quit? What if this is not worth it? What if I am getting nowhere? What if I should be doing something else? And these are useful questions to be asking yourself. And certainly if you feel like you're, miserable, you're stuck in some way, you're not thriving, you're not content, you don't feel purposeful, you don't feel like you're contributing in any meaningful way, then it's important to question that. But if you're sort of ticking all these boxes, and sometimes every one of us gets a little bit stuck or unsure, I feel it's so important to remind yourself to be fully in and committed to that purpose that you've chosen for yourself. And also, every time that I'm sort of creating a new goal for myself, I also commit to that goal 100%. So this idea of being all in is really also important when I'm making goals or trying to get in the past, when I was trying to get a new job, things like that, I never really made plan B's or C's or any other plans. There was always just plan A. I was just fully committed to that purpose and cause, and somehow it worked out well for me. I mean, maybe this is, I don't know, maybe it's luck or anything else or other explanations you want to bring, but by all in, I also mean really committing for many, many years, not just a week or two. It's a process that you need to be committed to. And I know that my previous commitment, and me being all in on learning, for instance, about the fashion and sustainability, had led me to be where I am today. And without that, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I know that in the future, every time that I'm making any sort of future long-term plans, I know I have to be committed today to those plans for them to even have a chance to come to fruition. The other sort of really important element in my life that keeps me going is actually seeking failure. And it's something I do a lot when I'm as a founder and as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. I like to fail. It's really strange, I know, but I feel like if I don't fail, I'm not doing things, I'm not pushing myself enough, I'm not finding my limits or the limits of the project I'm working on. I'm not learning. I feel like I stagnate the minute I stop failing. And so far, I feel like my failures have been my biggest lessons in life. And it's something I would recommend everyone to practice on an ongoing basis, because failure is inevitable. You will fail. Your organ might fail, or your partner may fail you, or anything else can happen in life. So if you can best prepare yourself for all these inevitable circumstances to happen, you're much more likely to just be content with whatever comes your way and be able to tackle that situation. So yeah, I would say seeking failure is one important lesson from sort of business, but also life perspective. My sort of third, I'm pretty sure there's many more of these ideas that I live by, but one very important one is, again, a Stoic sort of philosophy, is this idea of memento mori. And the gist of this, something that I always envision, is that we all have a terminal diagnosis. We are all, from the minute we're born, we are dying, which is a weird way to think about life. But it is so true, and I feel like we forget on a daily basis that the only moment that is guaranteed is right now, and we don't really know how much more we have of this life, and that yes, at some point it will end for every single one of us. So, and my takeaway from this is this idea that life deserves respect. Every single moment of your life deserves respect. Every single person you meet, every project you take, every step you make, I think that's a song, deserves respect. And sometimes, of course, nobody's perfect, nobody's ideal, you can't always remind yourself of this rather daunting as well fact, but very, very useful when you might be suffering from anxiety of some sort, of lack of motivation, lack of agency to to own your life and to take steps towards what you want to do with your life. And then, okay, last one, I'll make it the last one, is this idea of imagining who you want to be or who you could be and actually showing up for that person every single day. So this is a concept that I arrived at when Firstly, I was reading a book called The Atomic Habits, which overall was an interesting learning opportunity, but didn't really change my life. However, one thing stuck with me from the book was this idea that if you want to be a runner, you should treat yourself as a runner, even though you have maybe never run, 5 minutes consecutively before. Similarly, if you want to stop smoking, for instance, then you have to treat yourself as a non-smoker. If you want to stop drinking alcohol, if you want to change any habit, you want to become someone else, you have to treat yourself as that person. You have to imagine that you are that person here and today, even though you might be deep into the negative habits of any sort. And this sort of then, I guess, along with many other things that I came across, I arrived at this idea that, I want to imagine who I could be and then show up for that person every single day. So, for instance, going back to even the smallest decisions that I make. So, I'm having a conversation with a friend and I'm about to say something. I question myself, is the person that I want to be, would she say that? Is this the way she would speak, or is that the way she would interact with another human? And then again, if I ever feel down and gratify myself in not a very positive way, then I think again to the person I want to be and ask the question of, would that person eat or do this thing at this moment, or would they do something else? So it becomes sort of a habit if you practice it enough. If you're mindful about it and you're making a conscious choice to sort of reflect on, again, not realistically on everything that we do, but at least on some of it, I think it is a very useful way of living and being. And to wrap up, because I see that surprisingly I have been chatting for a while, there has been some questions in around my work, Wearfer, being a founder, as well as my PhD from other sources. So I feel like I could maybe combine and tap into the two. So most of the questions around Wearfer were how I started the business, sort of the idea of basing your business around the values that I believe in and I've built the business on. And I guess the answer here is it's almost easier to build your business on a certain ideal or a certain set of values that again, you will be committed to 100%. And then also being open and flexible and agile to pivoting and changing pathways as you learn and as you grow and as you move on as time passes. I certainly feel like a lot of shifts have happened for Wearfer, for me personally as a founder since I launched the business. And I don't really know yet where the business will head into. I have certain ideas and directions. And again, this idea of commitment comes into place. I want to be all in on an idea and I feel like I'm close to it. So it's going to be a fun ride. But yeah, I think it helps to have that focus rather than floating everywhere and sort of tapping yourself into too many places. And then again, some questions around I guess maybe from the B2B side. So how does Wearfer work with artists? What are the plans there? And like I said, I am very much looking for almost a new direction, although not so much because like I mentioned, the foundations of Wearfer was on creativity and working in collaboration with artists. Right now, we continue working with artists, we continue releasing limited editions of really amazing wearable art pieces that have been made sustainably and ethically. And it continues to be the backbone of the business. However, I do want to find a more streamlined way of working with artists. I'm looking to converse more with artists to see what the pain points are and how best to tackle this creative space. So if you're an artist and you want to share your thoughts, I'm very much open to conversation and to learning from you. And I guess the journey so far for me as a PhD researcher has been a very interesting one and a completely new experience away from industry and business and entrepreneurship as well, although to be frank, a lot of these skills come in extremely handy as a PhD researcher, especially one where, as in my case, you're working with another business or organization. I'm working with the Prince and Princess of Wales Hospice, so that's a Glasgow-based hospice in Scotland, UK. And yeah, you're sort of juggling many hats as a PhD researcher. I know that no PhD is the same. Every single project will be unique. It also depends on the school you fall into, the department, the research area, the field of study. But the underlying sort of foundations are there in terms of, I feel like there has to be an inherent interest from you as a PhD researcher or potential PhD researcher or academic in general on epistemology, ontology, knowledge creation. How do we arrive at knowledge? What do we know is knowledge? So that's certainly a common thread. The other common thread is the sort of interesting combination of your own experiences and who you are as an individual and what you bring into the table, to the research per se. So that's what we call axiology in research. So how does you and your previous values, experiences combine with the issue at hand and create that new knowledge and that magical space that is research? So that's sort of the second thread, and I feel like you need to be willing to put yourself through that, and you want to be immersed into that process of knowledge creation. The third sort of magic element is the team you're involved in and with. So that could be your supervisors or your wider team, collaborative partners, things like that. What did they bring to the table? What is the context you're in? What are the unique problems you're facing? It's quite interesting. I always find that quite funny, but I feel like researchers, they create problems for themselves, which is exactly what you're doing. You're trying to find out gaps of knowledge, creating those problems and testing out for them. So yeah, it certainly has been a very massive learning curve for me. As an individual also to understand how new knowledge comes to be, and sort of translating that into the fast-paced world of business and beyond. I am also really grateful that for me, impact has been one of the key things undertaking a PhD. So being able to build impact into that project between the hospice and myself and the university is super exciting and motivating. So I'm happy to also talk about the PhD in more detail. I feel like I can only really touch the top of the mountain here, but it is certainly a really interesting challenge to face. I am a third in of the journey, and I'm really curious to where I will be and who I will be at the end of it. And I guess to wrap up, something that just popped into my head, so I might just bring it in, is this idea that we're always changing. And that change is the only constant, that we're always evolving, we're always flowing. I mean, I don't know, I'm a Polish native speaker, so I'm not sure you have the same saying in English, but in Polish we would say that you never step into the same river twice, and I never understood what that really meant. And it just means that the river keeps on flowing, and if you come back to that river the next day, it will be different particles. It will be a completely new set of particles that you're facing. And the same way, you as an individual, I am a different person now that I was when I started this conversation. I feel like I've already changed. I've had this experience of talking to myself for an hour, and that changed something within me. I'm not sure what yet, but I'm sure I will find out when I sleep on it. I feel like sleep is another really important element of life. And it almost feels like sleep is a reset button for all of us, which no revelation there, but it's like a save button as well. So you're saving, you've done so much, and then if you don't get enough and a good amount of sleep and good quality sleep, you haven't saved what you have done. So it's redundant. You're not really registering it deep in your body somewhere. At least that's how I take it. Anyway, I am definitely going off on a tangent, and these additional points have not been part of my list, but there you go. So yeah, I guess I'm going to wrap up here. I hope this was somewhat interesting and useful. I'm not sure I will be doing more of these solo talks. I do hope to arrive at a wave of inspiration and really interesting, and connect with interesting speakers and guests from the fashion industry and beyond, bringing you some further thoughts and learnings as we go through and navigate this world together. But thank you so very much for tuning in today. I do hope this was an interesting one, and I will speak to you soon.